Tes, tes.
Ini mati.
Tes, tes, tes. Nggak ada. Tes,
Pasti masih dari sana.
tes,
Ini aja udah gua matiin. Tadi gua matiin speaker
tes.
sini.
Mana nggak ada?
Enggak, maksudnya nanti apa namanya? Nanti kok dari
Halo, Mbak Mbak Vidi, suara sudah aman?
Tapi jangan pakai scan ya, ambil tangannya ya. Karena ruangan ibu ya. Paling satu ruangan
Kameranya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, dan salam sehat untuk kita semua. Yang saya hormati, Employment and Labor Marketplace Specialist, ILO Country Office for the Indonesia and Timor-Leste, Mr. Diego Rey, Technical Labor Specialist in Public Employment Service, ILO Geneva, Ms. Anna Karim Palm Olson, para seluruh pengantar kerja yang saya banggakan. Puji syukur kehadiran Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa atas limpahan rahmat dan hidayahnya, sehingga kita dapat berkumpul melalui Zoom meeting dalam rangka webinar series layanan pengantar kerja bagi penyandang disabilitas di Indonesia dengan tema peran layanan pengantar kerja publik dan pengantar kerja dalam inklusi penyandang disabilitas di pasar kerja, layanan kepada pemberi kerja, kemitraan, dan strategi tim. Acara selanjutnya, arahan yang akan disampaikan oleh Bapak Diego Rey, selaku Employment and Labor Market Policy Specialist, ILO Country Office for Indonesia and Timor-Leste, kepada Bapak Diego Rey, dipersilahkan.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being with us. Today, it's our third webinar about provision of services to people with disabilities. My colleague Anna Karin Palm Olson from the Geneva headquarters is with us. She's gonna deal with the third area, which is the provision of services to employers, and also a hot question. It's how to convince employers to employ people with disabilities. Having said that, I will leave the floor to her directly, and we'll see you later for question and answer. Thank you.
There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Diego, also for that introduction. My name, as you know, is Anna-Karin Palmolsson. I work here in Geneva in Switzerland as a technical specialist on labor market services, but I think you know me by now. So today we will focus more on service to employers. The last time we focused more on service for job seekers. So I'm going to ask my colleague to show the second slide, please. And then also the third slide, please. So looking at the background and what we're talking about here, and I think a lot of you will also recognize this maybe from the online training, but also a little bit about what we spoke about last time. So what we're basically talking about is how we all kind of contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal 8 within the Agenda 2030 that all UN countries agreed upon a few years back in 2020. No, a little bit further back, actually. Sorry about that. So we do have these targets, and of course, 8.3 is the one that kind of mostly connects with us and connects with the employment services, especially when you look at how we can support employers. And when it comes to employers, of course, we want to include in this also support to self-employment, support to entrepreneurship, and so on. But we also know that most of the labor market actually consists of micro or small and medium-sized enterprises and not by these big companies and global corporates and so on. So it's very important to understand that the service that we give within the public employment services really has to connect also to these small and medium-sized enterprises, as those are very vital for the labor market. In some countries, they actually consist of over 90% of all the employment opportunities within the country. And then also make sure, but at the same time, they don't have the same kind of HR departments and so on as big employers, which means that as a public employment service, it becomes very important to kind of fill that gap or help them along when it comes to hiring staff that they need to develop and actually become the best themselves, like to actually fulfill their full potential. And here we can connect also to the importance of labor market information and also making sure that we as PES staff also are the experts on the labor market. We are the ones who actually carry the message about how the labor market is developing, what the labor market will look like, and also what are the development opportunities for this company, because we all know that making companies grow is very much at the core when we do matching and fill vacancies. Next slide, please. So looking at service for employers and looking at service for employers in general. Next slide, please. Thank you. So looking at service for employers, and I think you remember this from the online training as well, that very important of also ensuring that you can layer kind of the support that you give towards employers. And this is no difference when we are speaking about persons with disabilities. However, we have a tendency as within the public employment services to kind of focus on the services that we do give for job seekers. And I don't think this is done by some kind of malfunction or something. It's just because of the more dire need usually of a job seeker than an employer. And we naturally tend to help those who are in the least favorable position, let's say. But we look at the generic services, and of course, that is the identification of needs and support in drafting the job offer or vacancy, disseminating the vacancy and putting the employers in contact with candidates. So basically the basic services when it comes to matching. And of course, we also usually provide online digital services. Going deeper into this, we can also make sure that we as public employment services have services according to profile. So we help the company, and this can be very important for small and medium size enterprises, to do a pre-selection of candidates and make sure that they can contact the employers through the public employment services. And this is so the employer doesn't have to put like too much time and effort into, if they have 400 applicants, that is too much for a small company to handle. Of course, we make sure that the recruitment is according to the fair recruitment principles. So we ensure that is part of our services. And then, of course, if there's any part of the public employment services where you also give financial assistance for recruitment. And then you have the most in-depth layer, which is services plus, or whatever you want to call it, where you actually support companies for their projects when it comes to developing. For instance, they have a 3-year plan of developing their company. So you are part of that kind of planning all along, making sure that you are filling almost a gap of a strategic HR partner or something like that. You do a job analysis, and you can also see if there's any available ALMP like training that can kind of upskill people for certain vacancies within the company. Next slide, please. So looking at the, So looking at the main observable trends that we have within public employment services on a global scale when it comes to service for employers, we look at the professionalizing advisors, so like almost making certain PES staff professionalized or specialized on the service for employers, and strengthen the service offer in that manner from the public employment services by having specialized staff only for employers. We look at strengthening the image and visibility of the public employment services to ensure that employers out there know the PES exist and know that they can use their services for free. Of course, also looking at more the competences or the skill-based approach instead of looking at formal education and formal prerequisites. And then, of course, this kind of more in-depth human resources consulting that I was speaking about, almost filling the gap, especially for smaller employers of HR services. Next slide, please. And to professionalize advisors or specialized advisors and strengthen the service offer, it's important that the public employment services invest in the service offer for employers, that there is a strong strategy there which offer a level of services comparable to that of job seekers. So you actually invest as much in the services and develop the services for employers on the same kind of scale and level as you do for job seekers. There should be segmentation or sectorial approaches of employer customers or business customers as well, to ensure that you have a good overview of what is happening in a certain sector. And then, of course, these different service levels depending on the intensity of the support that is needed from the employer as well. These professionalized team can also be then you'd kind of choose to specialize certain advisors to only service employers. You remove apprehensions, as I said, to also do some marketing and increase the visibility of the public employment services so the employers understand that this is a vital partner for them to have, and then they can rely on the public employment services and so on. And it's also important when you look at actually having a specialized service for employers to almost have like a corporate culture or a commercial approach also of the public employment services, to actually see if you can kind of steer the employment services in a manner where it's more of this kind of business case approach. And we'll speak a little bit more about that when it comes to persons with disabilities later on. And of course, also this kind of rise in digital services, which also needs to be then offered to employers. So services dedicated to employers only, personalized spaces where they can actually register and search for vacancies and so on. And of course, that they can also submit offers online. And one of the very important part of when you are having service for employers is that the digital services should really be there 24/7, so 24 hours per day and 7 days per week, because a lot of employers, and especially smaller employers, they don't have the time during the day when they are in production to actually outline a vacancy or something like that, but rather do that during the weekends or in the evenings when they have closed their business and so on. So it's a very important part of making this kind of accessible, especially on the digital realm. Next slide, please. So what is the problem then when it comes to service for employers for many PES? So there are just too few employers who use the services of PES. Basically, it's not visible, it's not seen as reliable, it's seen as services only for job seekers. So there is a lack of confidence in the capacity of the public employment services to actually help the companies because they feel like they have private recruiters or something that can actually help them better. So it is a little bit of a competition in that manner to show your abilities and your services for employers to ensure that they understand that this is reliable, sustainable resources that are free. And so, of course, you need these kind of short, medium, and long-term approaches, and this can be very much part of a employer strategy for the public employment services, but also to ensure that you need to understand that once you start talking to an employer, that is a long-term commitment and not something that you do just one-off or once in a while. There is a need for the public employment services and all staff at the public employment services to also promote the services and to inspire confidence and proving that you are this partner that the employers are actually looking for. And of course, it's always good to have a marketing strategy. So to identify also the employers kind of to conquer those recruiting providers, but also those vectors of influence, and also look into organizations of employers or collaborations between different employers and so on, and look for the stronger players. Next slide, please. So looking at what employers are now looking for, actually, when you look even on a global level, the employer seems to actually look more at skills than diplomas. And there is actually limits of matching based on trade nomenclature. So like this ISCO or whatever kind of system you have, it's quite limited in that manner, especially when you look at the needs of employers. So it is important that you are maybe having ISCO or some other kind of classification of trades in your system, but it's important that the system also allows for a widening of the scope by identifying, for instance, transferable skills, soft skills, and so on. And it's actually proven that over 60% of employers believe that soft skills are more important than, for instance, technical skills. And the top 3 soft skills that they want is the ability to organize and prioritize tasks, the ability to adapt to change, and knowing how to work independently. So that's what they are actually looking for within staff. When it comes to the other more formal qualifications, employers are actually often open to actually on-the-job training or making sure that they can kind of adapt the person into their work culture as they want to. Next slide, please. So looking at the human resources consulting, see if I can get the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So this kind of service plus for major companies, a lot of times you actually sign a service contract with major companies and ensure this kind of long-term relationship and trust. And then, of course, dedicated contracts for also mutual knowledge. And these kind of service contracts we can see also now is appearing a little bit different in the different parts of the world. But one of the public employment services in Belgium, actually, because they have 3, they have these kind of service contracts specifically targeting diversity in workplaces. So this can also be a good example to look at because they are actually approaching employers ensuring that they sign a diversity contract with employers, so they actually give services to ensure that they can have a diversified staff within their companies. So of course, there's also this kind of support for companies' projects. So for instance, if they are anticipating needs or if they are looking to expand, to be there as a public employment services and actually help them with that, to ensure also to look at the demographics within the company to see if there's also other geographical locations that needs to be involved and so on. And of course, this special case of job carving as well, which kind of divide the trades into different activities. So it's quite time consuming, but also for the public employment services. But the whole point of this is actually to relieve certain professionals from time consuming activities that require little qualification. And one of the examples we'll go a little bit deeper into, but one of them is, for instance, you come to a hospital and you see a lot of nurses, for instance, doing a lot of administrative work instead of actually things that are connected to their profession, like nurses. Next slide, please. So in highlighting this kind of advisory aspect and looking at the job carving a little bit more closer, one of the arguments could be like, according to recent trends, the labor market is developing in this direction to always show your professionalism and your knowledge about the labor market as past staff. This is, however, always needs to be based on facts such as information from the labor market information. So in this case, we come to a hospital, we see that the hospital are telling us they need more nurses because the staff is overworked. And then one of the advisory aspects here could be, I hear you say that you need more persons to work as nurses, but when I look at your workplace, we can see a lot of time-consuming tasks that are more on an administrative level. So would you consider changing the division of labor to actually hire some administrative workers to relieve the nurses from this administrative burden so the nurses can focus more on the caretaking? And this, of course, nurses, we know it depends, of course, in different countries, but a lot of countries actually have a lack of nurses. So that could also be an advice you give to the employer, like there is not enough skilled trained nurses who are looking for work at the moment. Could we analyze together if there are any tasks that could be given to a person without a nursing degree? Or are you really looking for a nurse or for someone to relieve employees from administrative tasks? And this is just, I think you recognize this also from the online training, but this is just to show you that regardless of your engagement with employers, if it's for persons with disabilities or not, this is kind of what you have to do. You have to be professional. You have to go into the workplaces and actually analyze the task that they have at hand and see if there's anything that you can see that they have not recognized or analyzed themselves. And of course, always after a successful recruitment, you keep in contact with the employer, you follow up after 6 months or whatever is more convenient, and ask if there's anything new, how it's going with the recruitment that you made, and could the employer consider to be an advocate for using public employment services in recruitment. And this could be a very important contact, especially for persons with disabilities, because if you have done one successful recruitment for the employer and you keep in contact, you have a good relationship with them, that's when you also kind of can convince the employer to maybe hire a person with disability, right? Because they now trust you and they understand that you would give them good staff. Next slide, please. Of course, this whole thing is, as always, dependent on or kind of accelerated by the megatrends like demographic shifts, the climate change, globalization, and digitalization. And when it comes to digitalization, we can see a lot of digital divide. But at the same time, for persons with disabilities, it can also actually include this acceleration of digitalization can also actually include anti-discrimination practices. Because once you digitalize services, it might become more accessible for persons with disabilities, for instance, when they actually don't have to physically be there and so on. So it's very important to understand that, yes, we have the digital divide that kind of keeps increasing as we develop digital services, especially state services. But at the same time, there are also anti-discrimination practices there. For instance, also in reducing personal information in CVs for persons with for job seekers. You can see also that it kind of reduces the discrimination also from employers when hiring. Actually, when it comes to this digitalization, we can also see that access to data is not actually identified as a challenge in recent research, but rather the access of data has grown and it's quite large, but the challenges lies within data quality, harmonization, and consistency. Okay, so next slide, please. So when it comes to persons with disabilities and also the engagement with employers, what are the key factors and starting points? So awareness, as we said, and you recognize this from the last time we spoke, awareness is always key. That's where it starts. To understand it yourself, but then also being able to promote it to others like employers. The assessment of national challenges and opportunities. We spoke about that last time too, how to do that, what has been done so far in the country. You identify important stakeholders, you look at the competencies, you make sure that the conditions for supporting job seekers and employers to enhance disability inclusion is there within the public employment services, and you do a strategic approach with concrete objectives and outcomes. So you recognize this from a week ago, a week and a half ago. Next slide, please. So within the ILO, there's actually a global business and disability network, and it has its own charter with 10 principles. So this, I also included a link to this charter within the presentation. So feel free to also go into that website and explore it a little bit more. One of the first one is, of course, the promotion of rights. And here we come back almost to the awareness again. Promote and respect the rights of persons with disabilities by raising awareness and combating stigma and stereotypes faced by persons with disabilities. Looking again at non-discrimination to ensure that we develop policies and practices that protect persons with disabilities from all types of discrimination. And this becomes also very, very core to the part of what the PES needs to stand for. Equality of treatment and opportunities. And we will look at this also, but you can see reasonable accommodation coming back here, as we spoke about last time. On-the-job apprenticeships and trainings, making sure that you also make sure that the persons with disabilities has these opportunities and are equally treated at the workplace, which also includes this kind of sensitivity training or awareness of other colleagues and staff. Accessibility, progressively make the company premises and communication to staff accessible for all employees with disabilities. And of course, here is a very key component also for the public employment services to be able to assess the person with disabilities, what are their work abilities, what are their obstacles, but then also being able to actually go into a company and also analyze that workplace and what needs to be done to kind of accommodate the person with disability. Job retention, of course, to undertake appropriate measures to enable current employees who acquire disability to retain or return to their employment. Confidentiality, to also not share more personal information of the job seekers than you actually have to adapt to the workplace, and this is also very important to ensure that there is not an over discrimination of a person. Attention to all types of disabilities, and this can be very important, especially when it comes to sensitization of other colleagues and staff, to understand that, for instance, a person with mental disabilities act in a certain way or have problems coming there on time and things like that because of their disability, and not because they are lazy or just always late or something like that. So just an example. Ensure collaborations to both when you have an employer also who have already hired a person with disabilities, make sure that you kind of anchor them to you to ensure that they can also speak to other employers, because employers listen to employers. Evaluation to ensure that you have this review and regularly the company disability inclusion policies, but also to ensure that you have this regular contact as a public employment services for sure. And then this disability network also promotes knowledge sharing, of course. So to ensure that you can also have best practices and so on. So here you can have a lot of inspiration when it comes to looking at what you can do. However, it's not your job to do all of these things. It's part of the charter, but it's a good basis to get to know and to actually get yourself acquainted with. So you have these good practices, you have these good arguments when talking to an employer. Next slide, please. So what is then the business case? How do we actually convince employers to hire persons with disabilities? Okay, in the latest estimates, we can see that almost 15% of the world's population has some form of disabilities. So it's 1 billion people around the world. And they are often excluded from employment due to negative misconceptions about their ability to contribute in the workplace. But by focusing on skills rather than stereotypes, as we already know that the employers want to do, they want to focus more on skills than formal training and competences. Companies can actually gain access to a huge pool on untapped talent and maximize the potential of their workforce. So this is a very good argument to understand that if 15% of the entire population on our earth is disabled, then you can basically not get around hiring people with disabilities if you want to have the best talent and the best people at your workplace, right? Because otherwise it would be strange if you just excluded 15% of the entire population. So focusing then on the skills that we want, that we know already, that the employers are more focused on as well. The business case of workplace diversity has been well established in research, and we can see this across the board that employers with the diverse experience, or employees with diverse experience, have different approaches to problem solving, and hence they can increase a company's capacity for innovation because of they have different approaches. They have another view on things and bringing that into their workplace. Companies that are disability inclusive report highest levels of retention, so less staff turnover, engagement, and loyalty among their employees. So this is also a very key aspect of not having to put a lot of effort into hiring people and constantly having this staff turnover, because hiring people is actually very costly for an employer. And business that show a real commitment to inclusion also enjoy a better reputation among customers and are better positioned to move into new markets. So actually, this can also be a very good marketing idea for the employers in itself as well. So this is this slide number 14, when you have the PowerPoint for you, this is your arguments. This is where it lies, all of it. So looking at the charter, but then kind of as a basis, but then having this business case for you is very much kind of the convincing arguments for employers to hire persons with disabilities. And this can be very effective, especially if you have already provided the employer with a good hiring process before then. If you as a PES have already been part of a vacancy or making sure that employer found staff earlier that they are very happy with, then this can come into place in the next or the third whatever vacancy that you help them with. So this is when you can actually, after establishing a good relationship with an employer, this is what you can talk about, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide actually contains two links. So I wanted you to see the Indonesia page. I don't know if it's possible for the person helping me present to show the so this is actually a part, if you look a little bit further down, because I think you all know the legislation already that is part of Indonesia. But if we can look a little bit further down, you actually have, sorry, I have to move this. No, it's not possible to click on the link that says Indonesia. And show it to participants. Let me know if it's possible or not. Okay, it doesn't seem to be possible then, but at least you have there for Indonesia some companies who have already committed into becoming disability inclusive businesses. And this could be a good start point also for the public employment services to actually start engaging with these companies who are already there and see how you can support them in their kind of strategy of becoming more inclusive. And then at the same time, see if they can be role models for others, I think maybe smaller companies as well. On this webpage, there's also actually a self-assessment tool that can be done also, which can be very good also for employers to actually go through this yeah, okay, here we go. So a little bit further down, you have some names of companies who are already kind of both NGOs, but then also it becomes private companies who are already part of this network with the ILO as well. So they can be a good starting point for you to also get connected to. As you see, these are also very, very big companies, but start there and see how they were thinking when they talked about when they started engaging in this charter and this initiative, and see what they have gained from it. And that would also help you build your case when you are talking to others. I also included a link to a self-assessment tool, but maybe it takes too long to click on that as well in the PowerPoint. If not, it can be a very good tool also to show the employers where they can actually self-assess themselves on how they are doing when it comes to inclusiveness and so on. So I think it could be a good thing for you to use also. It's an online free tool that everybody can use. So get yourself familiarized with both this charter, the case in Indonesia, but also the self-assessment tool to make sure that you can present it also to employers. Are we showing the self-assessment tool, or should we go to slide 16? Let's see. The link is already in the PowerPoint, so you guys can for sure. Okay, so slide 16. So I hope you all remember Anna. She was the one who had a high school degree but no vocational training. She had some experiences working at a nursing home. She volunteered at her daughter's football club, but she did have a disease also that kind of causes pain and for sure reduces her mobility. And we were talking about this, how Anna needs support to find out more about how she can use her skills at work and how her disability affects her work ability short term, but also long term. So this we talked about last time. So now the question is, of course, how do we engage with employers for Anna? So next slide, please. So some of the examples where we could talk about for Anna, sorry, is, I think it's the next slide now. Slide number 17. Thank you. So we did talk a lot about, no, sorry, Formula 1, 17. You went too fast. There we go. So we talked a lot about employers wanting to focus on skills and abilities, of course, but also to ensure that we as public employment services can support analysis of the workplace, or work adaptation, and also to ensure that we have enough knowledge so we can actually help in the sensitization of other of Anna's future colleagues and so on. The workplace analysis also can be very beneficial in other aspects for the employer, depending on the scope of or the sector of work, right? Because the workplace analysis can kind of also highlight other things that might be very important for the employer, like, for instance, the access for customers to get into the store and things like that. This can also be part of a bigger strategy to develop operations of the workplace. We know already that if you have this kind of inclusive workplace, there is a reduction of staff turnover. And actually, people with disabilities also, when they are employed, they tend to be very loyal. They tend to be very loyal to their employer as well. And then we also know that this could actually enhance the reputation of the employer that actually employs Anna. Next slide, please. So yeah, so very much focusing on the third step and beyond here when it comes to Anna. So to ensure that she can actually be working at this KB products that we invented for Anna now as an employer, where we actually almost job harvested for Anna last time. So Anna is now working at KB products on the same conditions as her colleagues, but she needed this kind of adaptation and also the sensitivity training or awareness of her colleagues and so on has helped Anna a lot. Next slide, please. So I included also some group discussions. I think we're a bit too big of a group, but maybe this is something that you can do within your organization at a later stage as well. Take these questions and talk about what challenges you have when engaging with employers and what is specific for the engaging with employers concerning persons with disabilities, what works, why, what are the best practices, and how does it fit into the internal governance of the entire PES. Next slide, please. And then, of course, you can always do this kind of future discussion also within the public employment services to look at what challenges you have, what opportunities are there, and what do you as an organization want to develop as in the future? So what kind of development do you as an organization want to see, especially when it comes to persons with disabilities, and how can you kind of go further from where you are now? How can you go further? Next slide, please. I'm going to start wrapping up. So, of course, there are also challenges. It's not so easy as you just convince employers to hire persons with disabilities because it increases their innovation or reduces their staff turnover. But of course, there's always other challenges as well. There might be other circumstances, as for instance, high unemployment in general in a country that always has an impact on persons with disabilities as well. Because, as we said last time, persons with disabilities always need specialized support, regardless of the unemployment rate in a country. But we also know the better economy that we have in a country, the better are the chances actually for persons with disabilities to be employed. We also have the challenges of not just having a person is always an individual, and a person might not just have one vulnerability. We know, for instance, and that's very important, the gender equality and aspects are very prominent, especially if you're a disabled person and then also a female disabled person. The journey from unemployment to employment is even longer and takes more effort. So these kind of multiple vulnerabilities, also you might have a physical impairment, but then also mental impairment, for instance, together. So things like that also complicate things. And that's why it's so important to have this individualized support, but also being able to be professional enough to kind of analyze the workplace where you want to place this person. Another challenge is, of course, work mobility or work migration, labor migration for persons with disabilities is basically non-existent or very low, depending on different aspects. But of course, is there even a possibility for a person with a disability to go abroad and work? At this point, it's severely reduced, at least for those people. It's also important to understand that regardless of the job seeker, we as public employment services don't want them to just be employed, right? We want them to have the right employment. And for persons with disabilities, this is all even more harder, especially when you look at career paths and career guidance for persons with disabilities, not to have them just stuck in one position for the entire time of their employment, but rather they should also have the opportunity to advance within their career and develop themselves within their careers as well. And we always have to look, and I think I mentioned this the last time also, to look at the cost of inactivity for society, because it's quite grave. You look at the cost of inactivity for that individual person, but that individual person actually affects a lot of other different aspects of society, both, for instance, maybe the health system and so on, but also the fact that they might need caregivers also in their home, and that usually is family or friends that they rely on, who can also not perform their job, and they can also not fulfill their potential, let's say, as an employee. Okay, next slide, please. So what are the conclusions of what I've spoken about today? I spoke a lot, but I hope you guys soon have a lot of questions for me. Of course, we need this kind of clear and strong strategy that can be evaluated within the public employment services, especially for persons with disabilities, but you might also need a clear and strong strategy for engagement with employers. And then you need to make sure that these two strategies speak to each other, or that you have a joint strategy. Any efforts that you do within the public employment services, especially for persons with disabilities, needs to be kind of flexible enough to be able to be reformed, or at least continuously developed. Because it very much is, when you start working with disability inclusion as a public employment services, you need to have the flexibility to actually adapt as time goes, not only to labor market development, but also to ensure that you can adapt that, oh, this worked in this context, but it's more efficient to do it this way in all other contexts and things like that. You need to ensure that you have this long-standing engagement and commitment, especially with employers, to ensure that you can speak about persons with disabilities with them, because they know they can trust you. They know that you know your job, and that you are good at what you do. Specializing the employment services is, of course, very important to maybe both have a staff who is specialized on persons with disabilities, but also to have staff who are specialized in engaging with employers. And these type of staff groups also have to speak to each other and have a good collaboration. It's very important to give appropriate attention and means to engage. So a little bit about this reasonable accommodation, but also to ensure that you are in kind of a relationship, a long-standing commitment together with the employer. We talked about this last time again, like step-by-step approach, not to take on too much at once, but rather start small, focus on one group of disabled persons and go from there. Make sure that you have persons with disabilities already included in the staff of the public employment services, and they can actually help you and advise you in how to kind of develop in your professional capacity, but also in how to make the services more inclusive. Work in partnerships together with the NGOs, together with other stakeholders who work with persons with disabilities, and ensure that you use employers as role model for others. So if you have an employer who hired a person with disability, increase their visibility among other employers so they can also market themselves as inclusive, because employers do listen to other employers. Now I've spoken for a very long time. I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Bapak Ibu, acara selanjutnya adalah sesi tanya jawab. Bagi Bapak Ibu yang ingin bertanya, kami persilahkan. Terima kasih.
Everything was very clear. Perhaps.
Iya, selamat siang, Ana. Iya, mungkin sambil menunggu pertanyaan yang lain yang mungkin akan ditanyakan oleh rekan-rekan sekalian, ada beberapa pertanyaan yang kemarin ya, yang masih belum sempat terjawab. Nah, itu salah satunya dari Mbak Nikira. Jadi intinya dia menanyakan, apabila perusahaan itu punya CSR atau Corporate Social Responsibility, apakah itu dikatakan etis dia mempergunakan dana CSR-nya untuk bisa melakukan pelayanan atau penempatan bagi tenaga kerja disabilitas. Apakah itu bisa dikatakan kebijakan juga, apakah tidak? Dan jika memang itu iya, apakah kita boleh untuk bisa mendorong perusahaan untuk mempergunakan CSR-nya untuk bisa membantu penempatan tenaga kerja disabilitas pada perusahaan? Ya, terima kasih.
Can you please unmute me and Anna? Otherwise, every time is the same. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yes, I heard a question, and I'm sorry I couldn't unmute myself. I think I need a little bit of an explanation what these CSR funds are. I'm not sure if I know what that is actually, but if it's used for employment services in general, I don't understand why it wouldn't be also part of or possible to use it for persons with disabilities. I think the main focus should be always to have persons with disabilities included in the same kind of manner as any other job seeker. That would be my focus. So I hope that answered your question, although I'm not really familiar with the CSR system and what it stands for. Thank you. I'll just keep myself unmuted if there's anything else. But I think that's the main focus, to ensure that, of course, there's reasonable accommodation that we have to do for persons with disabilities, but do not exclude them as a specific group outside of any other services or any other support that you are giving, but rather have them inclusive to ensure that there's also not anti-discrimination or something like that happening.
Ya, baik Ana. Jadi CSR itu artinya yang dimaksudkan di sini itu adalah dana yang dimiliki perusahaan untuk bisa mengembalikan gitu ya kelebihan atau profitnya dia ke masyarakat. Jadi artinya dia tidak mengalokasikan khusus dana untuk penempatan disabilitas, tapi dia mempergunakan ya sebagian persentase profitnya untuk diberikan ke masyarakat. Jadi yang dikhawatirkan di sini itu tidak akan berkelanjutan gitu ya, hanya ada dana tertentu yang bisa digunakan, tapi kalau setelah itu sudah habis ya tidak akan bisa digunakan kembali. Nah, apakah hal tersebut bisa dikatakan etis juga gitu ya, kalau perusahaan ingin mempergunakan metode itu untuk bisa melakukan layanan terhadap penempatan disabilitas? Karena ada kasus yang ditemui di daerah tertentu, perusahaan itu mau, tapi karena dia tidak punya alokasi anggaran khusus budget untuk itu, mereka mau pakai CSR-nya saja. Tapi dia juga tidak bisa menjamin keberlangsungannya itu akan berjalan secara terus. Nah, itu kalau menurut dari Ana sendiri bagaimana? Seperti itu. Terima kasih.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the person who should be speaking about what is ethical when it comes to like national funds in Indonesia. So I think I'm going to opt out of that one, actually. I don't think I'm the person who should be speaking about what is ethical or not when it comes to national funds. But I will just say that I think mainstreaming services for persons with disabilities in the same way as you mainstream services for any job seeker is the way to go. Thank you.
Selamat sore, Mbak Intan. Boleh bertanya? Halo.
Ya, silakan Ibu Gracia.
Ya, terima kasih. Saya Gracia Yanida dari Kota Yogyakarta, pengantar kerja ahli muda, yang kebetulan saya diberikan amanat untuk handle ULD, unit layanan disabilitas. Kami sudah melakukan beberapa kegiatan sosialisasi ke perusahaan-perusahaan untuk bagaimana mereka bisa mempekerjakan tenaga kerja penyandang disabilitas. Dan dari pihak perusahaan itu menyampaikan permasalahan-permasalahan di saat mereka mau menempatkan tenaga kerja penyandang disabilitas. Sampai akhirnya kami memberikan penjelasan dan akhirnya mereka bersedia untuk menempatkan tenaga kerja penyandang disabilitas atau mempekerjakan tenaga kerja penyandang disabilitas. Nah, yang ingin saya tanyakan, bisa nggak kita itu membuat MOU, semacam MOU atau perjanjian dengan perusahaan bahwa perusahaan ini akan mempekerjakan tenaga kerja penyandang disabilitas dengan kriteria bla 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 gitu. Tapi MOU gitu. Ada tidak contohnya? eh, untuk kerjasama perusahaan dengan kita dinas untuk terkait penempatan tenaga kerja penyandang disabilitas. Mungkin demikian yang bisa saya tanyakan. Terima kasih.
I think that's also a great idea to look into if that is what you want to include in your strategy for the entire manpower or the entire public employment services. There are such examples, and I mentioned one of them today was, for instance, Actrice in Belgium does these kind of diversity plans that they sign together with employers, for instance. And there's a lot of information on that on the PES Knowledge Center as well. And I sent the link to the PES Knowledge Center, and also there's a PES podcast from the European Union where you can also listen to what they are doing with these diversity plans and how they are doing it. So a lot of information there, and I sent that link together with the outline of this training for you. So you should have that link already. But please have a look, and then don't hesitate to contact me if there's any more information you need, or if you want me to put you in contact with our Belgian colleagues. And I guess that's also kind of what we are doing. Yeah. I think that's also kind of what we are doing together with the in the ILO business disability network as well. That's also kind of MOUs that have already been signed, with some of the businesses also in Indonesia, for instance. So also the charter and the self-assessment tool and what has been done with the companies already in Indonesia is a good way to start, I think, in that manner. Yeah.
Izin membacakan chat dari peserta, Miss Ana, dari Dinas KUP Naker Kabupaten Pasaman. Izin bertanya, Miss Ana, bagaimana kita tahu bahwa keterampilan khusus yang diberikan kepada disabilitas bermanfaat untuk kemajuan usaha bagi pemberi kerja? Terima kasih.
I think it's a little bit of a professionalism in your role as a PES employee to start developing your skills when it comes to analyzing employers and their operations and their workplaces, and to see how you can fit in the skills of disabled person into those kind of settings. So I think it has a lot to do with you also developing within your profession, for sure. And sometimes you also have to a little bit be brave and try and error or try and succeed, and to make sure that you are always evaluating also what you are doing to ensure that the next time you can do it better, or you can do it in the same manner if it was very successful, or in a different manner if it didn't work. So that's what I also meant about constant reform and constant development, because this needs to be a component when you work on including persons with disabilities into the labor market as well.
Itu nggak ada lagi ya bisa.
Any
Bapak
more
Ibu,
questions?
ada yang ingin bertanya? Kami
Ya,
persilakan.
oke. Mungkin ini ada pertanyaan yang dikirim via Japri ya, Ana. Jadi ditanyakan
apa yang harus kami lakukan sebagai pengantar kerja apabila kami telah mencoba untuk menempatkan pencari kerja disabilitas pada suatu perusahaan, namun ternyata dalam perjalanannya si pencari kerja itu tidak dapat memenuhi ekspektasi perusahaan. Bagaimana caranya agar perusahaan bisa tetap percaya dan mau untuk terus bekerja sama dengan kami sebagai pengantar kerja. Terima kasih.
I think it's a matter of having that dialogue also with the employer constantly, and to be able also making sure that you do follow up on the placements that you have already done to ensure that you don't come into that place where you're kind of surprised by the fact that people are not performing to the level that the employer wanted them to or anticipated. So that's a very important aspect of counseling, actually, for employers to ensure that you are there and see as a support. Not saying that they are always right, because it can also be that they do not see everything that this person is doing. So you need to also be professional in that aspect to ensure that you also visualize or make visible what the person is actually doing and the capabilities, and not oversell a person either, but ensure that you base it on fact and base it on everything. And as I said, one at least a successful method that we have seen is that if you place a person without disabilities first, you see that you can build a trust with the employer and make sure that you have a good relationship, and then you start talking about persons with disabilities and maybe getting work from that for them as well, to ensure that you are doing a diverse different services for the employers as well, not only trying to place persons with disabilities, but maybe connecting it also to other types of placements and so on, and to make it qualitative. That's the only aspect. And if they are not happy with the performance of a person, it's very hard for a PES to step in there, because that's actually the responsibility of the employer to make sure that they also are getting the most out of their employees. It's not something that the PES should be responsible for. But of course, maybe make sure that the next placement you do is well founded again, and then look at what did the employer actually ask for and what went wrong the last time, and then how can we make it better the next time. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, my voice is a bit cracking. Yeah.
Kepada Ibu Gracia, ada yang ingin ditanyakan kembali? Kami persilakan.
Ya, sore. Nanya lagi, Miss Ana. Mungkin saya terlewatan ya. Yang mau saya tanyakan, ada nggak buku tentang analisis jabatan khusus tenaga kerja penyandang disabilitas? Jadi penyandang disabilitas ini dia cocoknya bekerja di sini, begitu ada tidak? Terima kasih.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's just one. I think there's a lot of different tools, also digital tools to assess workability. So I think it's more of what you are able to kind of bring into your own public employment services and to see. But regardless of any tool or book or whatever, you also need the professionalism of you, Gracia, and your colleagues also who have been working with persons with disabilities, and they're inclusive and trying to include them in different workplaces as well, to also be able to spread that knowledge and your expertise that you have through experience. Because that, even if you have the best tool in the world trying to assess a person's workability, it still doesn't help you when it comes to work adaptation, because every individual is different and every workplace is different. So to also have your experiences and your knowledge spread within the organization is very key to also being able to be successful. Yeah. But there are such tools, and I'm pretty sure you can find a lot of them online. If not, let me know and I can help you.
And perhaps if I may add, one part of the discussion is to see whether the person with disability fits the occupation requirements, but those occupational requirements are kind of codified. So we have an international classification of occupation, which is the ISCOB, and then we have an Indonesian classification of occupation. I'm pasting the link to the Indonesian version. This is all the occupations that were categorized in 2014. And of course, there are some new occupations today, 10 years after, but it's helpful to have a look to familiarize yourself with what is normally required in terms of qualification for a given occupation. This applies to people with disabilities and to people without disabilities. Having a clear understanding of what is usually required is helpful. And then we can see a match and compare the profile of the job seeker and see whether it fits that or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Yeah, it's very, very important to have that basis always with the facts and the research to ensure that everything you do is based in facts, for sure.
Udah ya? Karena ini ada pertanyaan lagi, izin dari BP3 MI Banten dengan Ibu Santi. Bagaimana caranya agar penyandang disabilitas dapat memperoleh kesempatan untuk bekerja ke luar negeri? Sedangkan dari undang-undang sendiri menyatakan bahwa untuk menjadi calon pekerja migran Indonesia harus sehat jasmani dan rohani. Terima kasih.
Yeah, I think this is a good question, and I think I touched upon it also in my presentation, that we talk about equal treatment and non-discrimination and so on. But when it comes to these things, and this was one of the parts where I looked at if you remember my slide with the challenges, I mentioned work mobility and labor migration also in that slide. That is a major challenge. And I don't think I have the answer to that because also there is no, as we spoke about last time in the last seminar also, there's no universal definition of different disabilities. One disability in one country is classified in one way and another way in another country. So when crossing borders, there's even more challenges and obstacles for persons with disabilities for sure. So I wish I had the answer for that because I think it should be accessible for all people to be able to move across border, especially for work. But I don't think it is in practice today, and I don't think I have the answer, unfortunately. If I had, I would very much like to share it, but at this point, I think it's one of those challenges you have to look at as well. And then if you are working with private recruitment agencies or private employment agencies recruiting to other countries abroad, to speak to them, to sensitivize them to ensure that they have the knowledge that they need and so on. But of course, it requires even more from the employers in the other country then to also accept a person with disabilities. So if we know it's hard within the national borders, it's going to be 10 times as hard actually in another country. So I wish, I guess in the ideal world, this would also be accessible for persons with disabilities. But today, no, it's a major challenge for sure.
Baik, Bapak Ibu, masih ada yang ingin bertanya lagi? Kami beri waktu.
Ya, Miss Ana, saya mungkin ingin bertanya dari sudut pandang Kak saya dari kementerian ya. Jadi sejauh yang sudah kita lakukan gitu kan, hal-hal yang sudah kita upayakan untuk bisa membangkitkan pemahaman dan awareness khususnya buat teman-teman pengantar kerja, salah satunya memang melalui kegiatan ini gitu ya. Dan kami berharap memang ini akan jadi pengetahuan tambahan juga buat teman-teman jadi lebih termotivasi. Nah, pertanyaannya kira-kira kami juga sudah tahu ya bahwa kementerian pun sudah banyak melakukan upaya-upaya teknis gitu ya. Tapi kalau dari aspek untuk SDM sendiri, hal apa sih yang memang baiknya perlu ditingkatkan selain mungkin dari pelatihan mungkin ya. Kalau pelatihan kami sudah upayakan untuk bisa memberikan pelatihan buat teman-teman untuk bisa maksudnya lebih percaya diri untuk bisa hadir atau muncul ke depan perusahaan gitu ya, menyatakan bahwa kami bisa membantu Anda gitu untuk memberikan layanan terkait penempatan tenaga kerja disabilitas. Kami punya istilahnya supply-nya gitu ya. Apakah bisa untuk diterima? Nah, kira-kira hal-hal apa sih yang mungkin ada tips dari Ms. Ana sendiri yang bisa jadi masukan kami sebagai instansi pembina untuk bisa menguatkan lagi nih peran teman-teman pengantar kerja agar bisa lebih optimal melakukan pelayanan begitu. Terima kasih.
Well, thank you. That's a very good question also. And I think it's what everybody is struggling with, all the public employment services and so on. But I think one of the main tools that you could provide for sure is this kind of in-house learning facility or knowledge sharing facility. It's very important for PES staff to be able to share their experiences and being able to share their knowledge in between each other. And that's how they develop, right? So that's how they can share best practices. That's how they can share things like that. So I think this kind of self-sharing, information sharing, knowledge platform, whatever, is very important. Also for persons, for instance, if you have specialized staff engaging with employers and specialized staff engaging with persons with disabilities, ensure that they have a platform to meet, to ensure that they can actually share their information and knowledge with each other. And that's how you kind of continue learning together and continue capacity building the staff in itself. Other things are, of course, also to make visible the expertise that your public employment services actually have. I think it's very important. It's one of those things where people in society who has not been in contact with the public employment services or employers who have not been, they don't really know about it. They don't know which kind of services they can be offered or what they can expect. So that's another thing of making it visible, almost like a marketing of the public employment services as well. And then also ensure that there is this kind of continuous development and continuous knowledge sharing, training, whatever you want to call it, within the organization in itself. So you enable the organization to develop and the organization to kind of move forward. But in that also ensuring that you show which kind of priorities are important for you as a ministry. So you're not prioritizing everything, but rather showing also what you want, what you are expecting from the public employment services. As I said, step-by-step approach, and rather start small and do it really well, and then build on that. So also make sure that you show your public employment services staff what they can focus on to begin with and how they can kind of build on that afterwards. I hope those were at least 3 advices. I hope they were good for you. If not, then please also through Diego or something, we can also speak a little bit more on that, obviously.
Baik, terima kasih sekali Ana untuk motivasi dan penjelasannya. Ini juga ada pertanyaan lagi dari Pak Muajib dari Situbondo. Kami di Snaker Situbondo baru saja mendirikan ULD Ketenagakerjaan, Unit Layanan Disabilitas Ketenagakerjaan per November 2023. Dan beberapa kali setelah melakukan kegiatan namun belum menyentuh esensi layanan disabilitas dalam ketenagakerjaan, serta belum memiliki kemampuan yang khusus dalam pelayanan kepada pencari kerja dengan disabilitas. Oh, ini untuk kami ya. mungkin Kemenaker atau mungkin dalam hal ini mungkin ada ILO, ada modul atau pelatihan baik daring maupun offline terkait pelayanan pada pencapaian disabilitas terkait bahasa, isyarat, akomodasi, ragam disabilitas dan lain umum. Oke. Baik, jadi sepertinya masukan ini misalnya untuk kami dari Kemenaker. Terima kasih Pak Muwajib. Ya, ini akan menjadi concern kita seperti yang tadi sudah misalnya juga sampaikan ya, bahwa memang dari kita memang harus memperbanyak gitu ya penguatan kapasitas gitu ya dan pengetahuan juga. Jadi insya Allah jika tidak ada halangan tahun ini kami juga ada pelatihan tematik untuk disabilitas. Jadi nanti mudah-mudahan nanti bisa kita wujudkan juga ya terkait hal tersebut. Ya mungkin dari sana mungkin ada hal yang mau ditambahkan, silakan.
No, I think, as you said, start small, step by step. That's going to be my continuous mantra, but nothing else. However, feel also that I am, of course, not after this seminar series that you have been so kindly inviting me to and been so attentive to, and I thank you all for that, for welcoming me and also being so engaged and so active. Then please also, I'm here if you want to contact me. So please do that through the ministry or through Diego, and I would be happy to continue the support, obviously. But thank you all for the attention and for very engaging and also for me a learning experience for sure. So thank you.
Bapak Ibu, apakah masih ada yang ingin bertanya? Ya, kalau tidak ada lagi, sebelum acara berakhir, kami persilahkan closing remarks dari tim
Ada
ILO.
Mbak Vidi, maaf
Ya.
Mbak Vidi ada satu pertanyaan
Oh baik,
dari Pak
silakan.
Sabto. Silakan. Dari Pak Sabto Cahyadi ingin bertanya apakah di negara Ibu Ana ada peraturan yang mengatur soal sanksi bagi pemberi kerja yang tidak memberikan kesempatan bagi tenaga kerja disabilitas.
In Sweden, where I come from, no, there's no such thing. There's no quota and there's also no sanction. But I think for instance, in France, you have that, and in many other countries, yeah. So there's a lot of other countries who have a quota system like you, but there's also a sanction to pay a fine if you do not comply with those quotas, yeah. But in Sweden, no.
And I just did a quick search in Italy. We have the quota and we have also a sanction. And the sanction, to give you an idea, is some 150 euro per day, which might be big or small depending on the size of the company, obviously. Just 150 euro per day is some 2,500,000 euro per day.
Yeah, and usually that kind of fine also goes back into a budget of money that goes then towards doing incentives and so on for persons with disabilities. So usually that it's a circular thing where companies would pay the fine if they do not comply, and then you use that money for advancing the persons with disabilities in the labor market.
Pak Ibu, apakah ada yang mau bertanya kembali? Kami persilahkan. Baik, Bapak Ibu, kalau tidak ada, belum acara berakhir, kita akan closing remarks dari tim ILO, yaitu Bapak Diego, yang dilanjutkan oleh tim dari Direktorat Bina Pengantar Kerja, oleh Ibu Indah. Kepada Bapak Diego, kami persilahkan.
Thank you. I'll be very short. First of all, thanks to Anna Karin for being with us these 2.5 sessions. She was with us also during the first session with Heba. Also wanted to thank all of you for being here. Today we were a bit less than usual. We were up to 450 previous sessions. Today we were up to 330. Still, excellent number. Glad you be here. You are here. Glad you stayed for the whole duration. Once again, to put things in perspective, we do not have a silver bullet. We are doing things step by step. We are sharing good practices. We are here to help. There is no easy solution. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But thanks for your commitment. And we stand ready to continue assisting. Thank you.
Thank you very much from my end as well.
Baik, sebelumnya saya juga ucapkan terima kasih sekali untuk presentasinya Ibu Ana Karin yang sudah membantu kami ya, khususnya memberikan banyak pencerahan juga bersama juga Miss Heba sebelumnya terkait penanganan disabilitas, dan juga tak lupa kami ucapkan terima kasih sekali untuk support dari tim ILO dalam hal ini Mr. Diego, Mr. Freddy yang selalu intens ya membantu kami juga pengantar kerja, sehingga kami bisa punya banyak gitu ya wawasan baru dan juga pencerahan. Dan masukan dari Miss Ana tadi bahwa kita harus sering sharing knowledge gitu ya, sharing session itu akan kami lakukan. Jadi teman-teman kita mungkin akan intens juga terkait hal ini, agar kita bisa saling sharing apa saja yang teman-teman sudah lakukan di dinas masing-masing terkait pelayanan disabilitas maupun yang lainnya, agar kita bisa saling menguatkan juga untuk peran pengantar kerja. Dan sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih sekali untuk semua perhatian dan bersama dari teman-teman semua pengantar kerja yang selama 3 sesi ini selalu intens bersama kita semua. Dan satu hal lagi terkait untuk sertifikat yang akan kita berikan, seperti yang telah kita sampaikan di awal bahwa kita akan berikan kepada teman-teman yang komitmennya tinggi mengikuti 3 kali sesi ini secara terus-menerus, dan nanti di sesi terakhir di daftar hadir ada pertanyaan, Miss Ana. Kami buat beberapa pertanyaan dari hasil pembelajaran dari paparan yang sudah disampaikan. Jadi ingin kami melihat apakah memang sejauh mana teman-teman bisa memahami juga dari aspek yang telah diberitahukan sebelumnya. Mohon maaf untuk segala kekurangan dari penyelenggara, dari Direktur Kerja, dan rekan-rekan panitia juga, dan semua teman-teman dari pengantar kerja seluruh Indonesia yang selalu sedia untuk bisa bekerja sama terus nih dengan ILO, khususnya Miss Ana mungkin dan juga Diego dan teman-teman. Nanti jika ada hal-hal yang ingin perlu kita kolaborasikan lebih lanjut, kita bisa sharing dan kita bisa buat lagi sesi-sesi berikutnya. Sekali lagi kami ucapkan terima kasih, salam sehat selalu dan sampai jumpa di kesempatan lainnya. Saya kembalikan kepada MC. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih kepada Miss Ana sebagai narasumber, kepada Mr. Diego dari tim ILO, juga kepada Mbak Indah. Kami informasikan juga kepada Bapak Ibu untuk mengisi absen dan evaluasi untuk memperoleh sertifikat yang sudah di-share di room chat. Terima kasih atas perhatian dan kehadirannya. Akhir kata, saya selaku pembawa acara undur diri. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang.
Ya, terima kasih. Thank you Ana, thank you Diego, thank you Freddy. Terima kasih teman-teman semua.